Hello, this is Doug Dillingham, and this is my Module 2 presentation dealing with free speech in school. The article or case study is walling off or welcoming in, where the school culture committee must determine where and how to draw boundaries between free political speech and offensive or harmful speech and offensive or harmful speech that qualifies as bullying or harassment. This is done by Harvard University. Very interesting case study. The takeaways from this case study, I wrote down some of the key points that really caught me as I was reading through this, and things that I kind of see within the classroom a little bit, or I've heard other teachers talk about, things that really kind of hit home, so to say. Um, a lot of the article, the case study dealt with like the original when President Donald Trump was inaugurated, or when he was going through his political campaign, dealing with, I don't want to sound bad or anything, but dealing with like the building the wall, some of the statements he made, and were those statements offensive and things like that. Is dealing with that. Kids do tend to come home or come from home, and they'll kind of mirror their parents. So if their parents are saying it at home, they're going to go to school and say it, and not think about that could be really offensive or damaging to some of their peers. Um, a lot of what this case study dealt with was, like I said, the building the wall, keep them out, things like that. That takes me to the second one there. Why do some people want to keep them out? There was a teacher that went in that case study that went deeper into that. That's a pretty touchy area. And he did kind of single some of the students out that did agree with President Trump's point of view, and maybe even kind of took it to a level that was a little bit harsh on them. I mean, this can go both ways. Yes, some students are for it, some are against it. I think as teachers, we need to take that neutral stance and hear both sides, and we should not be taking sides on these things. Um, and to further that point, as the case study goes on, again, I just highlighted some main points from that case study. Susie makes a point that we should be a political free zone. I can tell you right now that that's about impossible anymore. Our schools, kids hear it at home. Kids see the news. Kids have access to social media where there's news all over the place there. They are a lot more in tune to these things than I ever was when I was a kid. I didn't have those things when I was a kid. So I mean, I basically knew who the president was and maybe the vice president, and that's about as far as my life went, unless we were getting into a war or something like that. I didn't understand all that stuff, and I didn't care to understand it because it wasn't something that I sought out. I had to go seek that stuff out. All of these things are right in our kids' faces nowadays. So they are going to talk about it, and we need to be prepared to deal with that in the proper way. Um, being that we can't limit their free speech, and they also need to understand what the First Amendment actually is. And I do feel like we need to study the First Amendment, and that's something they talk a little bit about in this case study. Is that the First Amendment should be studied. Students need to understand that they do have the freedom of speech. Um, I'll go into some case studies. I'm going to take this a little bit further because I got interested in the case study, so I decided to look a little further into some things and just kind of study it a little further. So, the First Amendment is basically our right to freedom of speech. And, that's not just adults, that is students within the four walls of the school or the classroom, however you want to put that. Um, as I stated before, as teachers, we do need to stay politically neutral or at least cultivate respect for different perspectives. This is a statement from the case study, and we as teachers, educators, we cannot be taking sides and arguing politically within a classroom. I mean, we can ask questions and things like that, but starting heated arguments, which most political conversations do tend to go to a heated level anymore, um, we've got to be very careful of that. And we also need to teach our students to be respectful, listen to what is being said, and instead of just going into an immediate defensive heated argument, we need to be able to, cultivate that respect for having some different perspectives and agree to disagree. So, what is free speech? We're going through this big case study on free speech. Well, what the heck is free speech? Free speech is defined as the right to express information, ideas, opinions, free of government restrictions based on content and subject only to reasonable limitations. Um, it Again, we can't limit their speech as long as it's not harmful, as long as it's not something that's going to cause undue harm or mentally, physically, anything like that to someone else. I think really we can't limit our students to that. An example is it's not just speech. I mean, students draw things on themselves, students wear different clothes, things like that. That all kind of gets wrapped up into this. We had a student draw a swastika on himself. That is an example of a big no. Um, it was handled within our school. Things were, handled appropriately. But a swastika represents some serious hate, some serious, terrible, terrible atrocities that were committed against people, and that's just not a good thing. Um, LGBTQ is a hot topic. Students are understanding more and more about that, things like that. It's, that's not something we can really limit them or should limit them, however you want to look at that. Um, and we can talk about those things. What's our role in freedom of speech? We go back to the case study. Um, Politics, different things are going to come up in a classroom. Kids are curious. Kids have more access to things than what we have ever had in history. So they tend to know more about what is going on in the world. And they're going to be curious and want to talk about it. But it is our job to remain neutral, not pick sides, not steer them to a side, do any of those things, but to listen and to teach a little bit of tolerance to the students. Teach them to listen, teach them to, you don't have to accept what someone's saying, but you can be respectful of what someone is saying. Some cases in schools, they aren't just handled by the principal or administration or a teacher. Some of these cases have gone as high as the highest court in the land, the U.S. Supreme Court. I did pick out a couple of these, a couple pretty big cases. I'd heard of one, the other one was a little bit new to me. So this first one, Tinker versus Des Moines, 1969. Mary Beth Tinker was a 13-year-old junior high school student in December of 1965 when she decided to wear a black armband to school to protest the war in Vietnam. Tinker was asked to remove the armband. When she refused, she was eventually suspended from school. The case was taken to the Supreme Court. The ruling by the Supreme Court was that public school officials cannot censor student expression unless they can reasonably forecast that the speech will substantially disrupt school activities and invade the rights of others. This again is a two-sided point of view. Some people are going to view it as, our troops, our young men and women are going over, doing what they're supposed to do. We need to support them, and they could take offense to someone wearing an armband going against the war. Um, may have just had may have had the viewpoint, yeah, she's against the war. She's against our troops being sent over there. She's against death. She's against war. We can take that point of view as well. Bethel School District versus Fraser, 1986. This one's a little racier. The student does a lot use of sexual innuendos to push a student going for school counsel. Um, I'm not going to read it all. You can go through it a little bit yourself, but he does get pretty graphic, and it's very inappropriate. I do see he did get suspended. He served 2 of the 3 days. It was taken to the Supreme Court where they decided that a high school assembly or classroom is no place for a sexually explicit monologue directed towards an unsuspecting audience of teenage students. Accordingly, it was perfectly appropriate for the school to disassociate itself to make the point to the pupils that vulgar speech and lewd conduct is wholly inconsistent with the fundamental values of public school education. I agree 100% with that. You can read that again if you want. It's kind of disgusting, and yeah. I teach at a very small school. Our school tends to be lean a little more conservative as far as our students, our parents, things like that. We use a Summit platform. Mark Zuckerberg, we all kind of know about Mr. Zuckerberg, being that he is Facebook. You know, some of us have seen the news where there's a lot of thoughts where he did influence an election. So people are going to be a little, kind of skeptical about him at times. But this lesson was an eighth grade history lesson. It did cause parent phone calls, maybe even a couple parents coming up. Not real happy about it. The last part that we can take a look at this. I'll read it. This is going through like the Ku Klux Klan, the development of the Ku Klux Klan, the White Leagues, things like that, back in um, 18 mid to late 1870s. The last one in this time period, Republican would most closely represent the political views of Democrats today. So basically saying that the Republicans of today are closer aligned to the Ku Klux Klan um, than as the Democrats were back in that day. So people did take offense to that, and rightfully so. I don't know really why this was thrown into this lesson. I do feel like that was it's not something that needed to be in there, and the students would have learned this perfectly fine without that point of view stuck in there. Oops. I missed my reference page there. Sorry. Here's my reference page. Before I go into that, I just want to say that this was a really cool lesson. I enjoyed the case study, going through that, reading kind of a different point of view, things like that. But freedom of speech is highly, highly important. And as teachers, we do need to be careful with that. We do need to allow our students, the ability to express themselves and to, talk about things. We can teach these students how to be, a little bit more tolerant, or again, agree to disagree without turning it into a giant blow up, which is what we see on news and everything else. I mean, you can't watch a news, you can't watch the news on TV without watching two people get in a debate, and you can't even understand a word of what they're saying because they're talking over each other and fighting and everything else. It's totally pointless. So, um, I think we should teach our students, listen to another perspective, and then the other person may have a different perspective, and you're going to listen to that one as well without fighting about it. Yeah, this was a very valuable module. Enjoyed it a lot. Hopefully, enjoy my presentation.